Hi, perfect. Thank you. Thanks so much, Darlene. And thanks so much to everybody for, yeah, as Darlene said, taking the time and for your interest in this topic. So I'm going to share my screen and uh, uh, tell you a little bit about us and what we're up to. I have about 30 minutes planned. I notice we're about 50 minutes into the session here now, where we started a little bit late. So by all means, pop any questions you have into the chat box, and I can keep an eye to that as we go along, and definitely have some Q&A at the end, as I understand these Sandbox sessions normally run. Yeah, so thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. I'm based out of Gander in Newfoundland and Labrador, but I'm coming to you from a hotel room in the capital city of St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. And I'm actually going to stop my camera only because if the internet is at all shaky here, that should help. So there we go. So my picture should be there, but hopefully everybody can see my screens. Darlene, you can see my screen okay? Yep, excellent. Okay, so I'll carry on here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Community Sector Council, Newfoundland and Labrador, the reason why GMIST reached out to me to deliver this session is we're a nonprofit charitable organization. We've been around since 1976. We do all kinds of interesting work in the nonprofit sector, from research, organizational capacity and development. We lead volunteer week celebrations in this province. We do bring together people in the sector to brainstorm, to find ways to work together, to be innovative, to be creative. And we really find ways to build up the sector. And we do all of these things because we believe, we know that the community sector is central to economic and social progress. So, of course, knowing the lens through which all of you do your work, this certainly fits in well, the types of information and resources that we share. Okay, and just actually to go back to that there for one moment, when I was checking out the Grossmorn Institute for Sustainable Tourism, and I love the GMIST, by the way, and just looking at some of your objectives and goals, and one of them being this respect for strong community development principles. We know that so much that happens in communities around tourism and around economic development. So through that lens, we know that the community-based sector is relied on heavily to make some of these things happen. So I'm most familiar with work here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So all you need to do is take a tour of this province and you see how much the nonprofit community-based sector is relied on for the tourism experience, right? So be that community theater, if it's through the leadership roles with walking trails, with hiking trails, and the role that they take on as volunteer leaders, the festivals and events that happen across Newfoundland and Labrador, and the role that volunteers play there. It's enormous and of such great value. So I see why GMIST would, put their heads in this space, and why all of you would come to the table to discuss something like this. Okay, thanks. So just wanted to chat a bit about volunteerism and about some big shifts that have been happening. Um, and it's funny because these things do come up in conversations when we talk about volunteer engagement and getting involved. And in fact, I was at a meeting this past week in Grand Falls, Windsor, where a participant talked about these shifts and trends and how volunteerism was created for, a family in the 1950s where the stay-at-home mom and, the dad might have gone off to work, and where people's home lives and schedules created a situation where children came home after school and where the mom of the household was the volunteer and who put in the time. But of course, families are changing, society is changing, and what were considered those norms at that time are changing. So groups are having to change to adjust and to look at this new breed of volunteers and meeting their expectations and meeting volunteers at where they're at, as opposed to saying, this is how we've always done things. So there is this shift. So I just kind of want to talk about a few of these things before I talk about volunteers and about some engagement strategies. So some of these social and cultural shifts, I just have a couple of slides on those. So one is just those family dynamics. And if anyone is familiar with these two shows on TV, we think back to the whole Father Knows Best kind of television show, decades ago. And when we looked at, as I just spoke about, what the norm or the traditional family or home as it might be viewed at that time. And then you look forward now to a very popular show that's been on TV, Two and a Half Men, where you have two brothers who live together and they're both raising one of their children. And the mother is really involved in the family. And it just kind of speaks to the change in family dynamics and the makeup of families and how people are working within families. So that shift and the expectations around availability, for example, is really changed, and it's changing who can volunteer and how, and even the why they would volunteer. So family dynamics is a biggie. Then there's also just the way society has changed, that it seems to be less of attitude around community and doing for the community coming together. And people seem much more, I don't, and maybe you're experiencing this in the work that you do, but more about individualism and more about me, about I. And people, and this has nothing to do with COVID, this is even pre-COVID, to people not necessarily engaged in the larger community where, we might say things like, oh, it takes a community to raise a child, because people seem to be much more focused on themselves. Then there's this switch around formal volunteering and having these like rigid schedules. So for example, if you were going to volunteer at a hospital, for example, decades ago, and how that schedule might look and how there might be ownership of certain volunteer roles there. And things are shifting now to organizations having to make positions available for when volunteers are available. So as opposed to telling a volunteer, this is when we need you, it's more about when are you available to help us, and creating roles around that. And then this big generational kind of differences as well. So when you think about people who perhaps grew up in a culture of volunteering, perhaps there was a parent at home and one who worked, and they viewed, that family member volunteer being involved, they might have followed in their footsteps, to generations now who may not be seeing people around them volunteer, who might not have been dragged along to a volunteer event, with their parents or with their grandparents. And they might not be seeing that. So really new to volunteering and not have a lot of experience. And then we throw in these couple of years with COVID. So even, for example, in Newfoundland and Labrador, where high school students would have to get the 30 hours of volunteer time, for a couple of years, that requirement has been dismissed. So they haven't had to do that. So even those young people who would maybe only be exposed to volunteering because of that school environment, even they haven't experienced it. So that's a bit of a shift as well. And then the whole role of technology, right? So this big shift, and again, even pre-COVID, where this change in how people meet, and in how they're using technology to help them meet. So everything from like Google Docs and being able to use a Google survey to figure out who's available to attend a meeting at any particular time. And then moving along now to things like Zoom and everybody's realization that, wow, we're a provincial organization and we don't have to meet in person. We can meet more often through Zoom and virtually and pull people together at a moment's notice. So that's a big shift as well. So then here now on to my second slide about these social and cultural shifts. There's been a shift when we look at like 21st century changes from skilled based workers to more knowledge based workers. So when we think then about volunteerism and people coming into the sector and wanting to do, this valuable unpaid work, what kind of skills are they bringing to the table? And are they the skills that we need? Episodic volunteering is huge right across Canada. So people are saying they're reluctant to sign up for these long-term commitments. Like they feel like it's almost a life sentence if you agree to serve on a board of directors, that even though some of them have a term of 2 years, there's always this little clause that says, unless no one else is available, if you can't find someone else to step into that leadership role, then the current chairperson can continue. And there are people who have like this founders syndrome, who've been involved with an organization for so long. Perhaps it's time for them to move on, but they haven't. And people who are new to volunteering see this. They see that people had to make very long-term commitments. So they're saying, I'll help. I want short-term, episodic ways to volunteer, right? I want to be able to come in, help with a community festival for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then I'm done. Or I'm happy to help fundraise, but that's all I'm going to volunteer with for the month of May, and I'm done. Or I'll come help with a special event, I'll help plan it, but then I'm done. Or I want one job. I don't want to serve on the board of directors. I don't want to serve on the committee. However, I have skill set in graphic design. So I'll put together your promotional materials, but that's it. I'm done. So short-term projects and initiatives or activities that they can just do kind of on a one-off basis or just in episodes. Then I'll just move on here to like the whole work ethic and leisure. So like from hard work to people wanting to feel good about the work that they do and wanting to strike work-life balance. So when I say work, I don't just mean paid work. I mean volunteering, right? Unpaid work as well. And people want to find ways that their volunteer work can make them feel good as well. So I'm going to speak about motivation, what might motivate people to volunteer coming up, but that's the big issue there in society, like overall. And then the micro volunteering. So this is kind of in line with the episodic volunteering as well. People wanting to take on bite-sized projects and organizations needing to adjust to that. And then just the whole speed at which the world is moving, right? That over, the past decades, things moving slowly to all of a sudden, everything is so fast and quick. And when we're involved in something, people send out a text, and if you haven't responded in an hour, people think you're ignoring them or something's gone wrong, right? Like everything, the expectation that everything is going to be so quick and addressed so quickly. And people, when there's something going wrong in a volunteer organization, needing to address it very quickly and to get out ahead of things. So the speed of which we expect things to happen has really shifted. So I know, Denise, we said that we could do some Q&A at the end, but I'm just going to say here now, just thinking about these two, did anyone want to make any comments on any of those cultural shifts? Are you finding this in your organization? And you can feel free to unmute yourselves and speak to it if you like. And if no one wants to, that's okay too, but I just want to put it out there. So would anyone like to speak to this? Yeah, Tracy, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. We are seeing this. We're also seeing the fact that the younger generation is harder to engage. And our volunteers who are predominantly volunteering right now are really wanting to find a way to succession plan. How to get those younger people into volunteerism. So this actually helps me quite a bit to be able to share these shifts with our current volunteers. They might be able to find ways in which that they can engage new volunteers to help, keep that movement of volunteer moving forward. And we're in an environment where we couldn't do what we do without our volunteers in Haliburton Highlands. So our tourism is at risk if we can't find a succession plan and continue to find those new volunteers to take over. So this helps tremendously. Thank you so much.
Oh, good. Tracy, we have, and I mean, we offer a lot of different workshops. I mean, this is the kind of information we like to get people together around for like 4 hours. So it's a big ask of me to try and pull some main points together. But we do have some resources that we can share. So Darlene, if I were to send you some of those, we have some info sheets on youth engagement from a particular project that we did with some tips, Tracy. So if I send them to Darlene, you can get them out to
absolutely
today. Great. Yeah. So I'll just make note of that, Tracy.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I'll email
them. That's fantastic.
Okay, great. Thanks. Anyone else there want to make any comment on any of these? No? Okay, well, I'll carry on here. I'm just going to chat in the chat box. Okay, so Tracy, Joe said he'd like to receive that as well there, Darlene. So anything on send, I'll make note and you can get that to everyone. And thank you, Tracy. Okay. All right, so just carrying on here, just to tell you a little bit to kind of lay the foundation of who is actually volunteering. Well, in Canada, about 12 million people. The national average is about 44%. The highest rate of volunteerism is in Saskatchewan, 56, and the lowest rate in Quebec at 32%. I don't have it handy here for all provinces. I do know that Newfoundland and Labrador is at 46%. So I always feel good that we're above average in that way, but I respect there are people on the session here today from other provinces in Canada. So this information comes from the National Survey of Giving, Volunteering and Participating. They tell us, survey says, this is who's volunteering. More women volunteer than men. People in higher income brackets tend to volunteer more. People who have post-secondary education, people who have children at home, and I'll qualify that a bit. We believe that that has to do with people volunteering where their children are. So volunteering around Girl Guides or your local hockey association, library programs that your child might be involved with, or family resource center programs, and churchgoers report that they're really big into volunteering. Just in terms of the whole gender divide there, the survey only collected it in terms of women, men. So I suspect that that will be updated for the next survey to better reflect gender identification. I always do add that in previous surveys, although more women report volunteering, when men volunteer, they give more hours. So I find that quite interesting, right? That little bit of change there. Older volunteers generally do give more hours. So people above the age of 55 give about half of the volunteer hours that are given across Canada. So young people, when I do this presentation, say, yeah, we always see a lot more older people volunteering. So they're right in that observation. So this is an Atlantic Canadian results here from the National Survey of Giving, Volunteering and Participating. So I find this interesting because it just outlines the type of work that's being done. And the other interesting thing is you will find, and you can think to organizations that you're involved with, the different tasks or jobs that are asked. So you may have one person volunteering with the theater program, that operates, or let's say, for example, a hiking program that takes people into the backcountry somewhere. Um, those volunteers might have different jobs. So they might be helping to raise money. They might also be helping to organize a special event. Maybe they sit in a leadership role with the organization. Maybe they do coaching as part of it, or educating. Perhaps they do maintenance or repair on the trail system. Maybe it falls under environmental protection and education and awareness. Maybe they volunteer with search and rescue for that committee. So much work that needs to be done. And many volunteers will report, I'm involved with an organization, but I take on many different jobs within that one organization. So here are some challenges that are reported in volunteer organizations. So leading the list, and it comes up just like even anecdotally, I can share with you, recruiting volunteers, and not just recruiting, but keeping volunteers and keeping them meaningfully engaged in the work and getting the right skill set. So it's not like just, a bum to keep a seat warm. It's when organizations need a specific skill set to help them do the work they do. Building new leadership. So challenges around, people tell us they'll help, but they don't want to be in charge. Changing demographics, right? So we experience a lot of that here in this province, and Tracy had noted, that where she lives and smaller communities and some of those shifts. So the changing demographics even of people who work away for 6 weeks and come home, and organizations needing to adjust. So how do we accommodate people who are away for 6 weeks at a time? This is happening with volunteer fire departments, for example, who have a fairly rigid schedule, but they have to change their training schedule because so many volunteers are working outside of the community for weeks at a time, and they're missing their volunteer training hours. So it has to shift. And then a declining pool of volunteers, particularly in smaller, more rural communities, or where there aren't as many young people coming up through the ranks. Also, volunteer groups talk about the role as an employer in many cases. So having to recruit and manage staff and take on that role. Then insurance and risk management, project funding. But so much of it, it's like around that HR piece, right? That these are the challenges around paid people and unpaid people. So when we talk about volunteer programs, sometimes people will say, oh, we don't have a volunteer program. We just, it's not that formal. We don't have a program. But I often reflect and I tell them, if you're dealing with one volunteer a year to help do the work that you do, you have a volunteer program, whether you like it or not, right? So it might not be formalized, but you have it. And it takes energy to manage volunteers. And it's a function so important that someone has to do it, whether that's a paid person or a volunteer who manages volunteers. It's a function within organizations. And there are a lot of themes, training that we offer around all of these topics. And I mean, you can find tons of information online just by doing a Google search, but things like preparing for volunteers, recruiting them, finding the volunteers, any screening, and make sure you have the right volunteer for the right role, or that you're weeding out any inappropriate volunteers, providing them with orientation, with training on how to do their job. Who's going to supervise them? How are you going to recognize them? Evaluate their performance or the performance of the volunteer program itself. So there's a whole lot of work that has to go into having volunteers engaged with program service delivery. And sometimes we see engaging volunteers as a way to save us some work when it can create a whole lot of work. So you really want to consider, like, in what roles do we want to use volunteers and how can they really be helpful? And can we provide them with meaningful volunteer opportunities. So Darlene, I'm just going to do this again rather than wait till the end. We're going to be some intermittent Q&A here. Did anyone want to comment on any of this? So just reflecting on your organization and your engagement of volunteers right now. Are there any tips that you might offer others or things you do that works well when it comes to your volunteer program? And like seeing this list here of these considerations. Is there anyone where, you know, your mom right now is thinking, oh yeah, right, this is something we had to implement for this very reason, Bettina. So would anyone like to share anything? And if you don't, that's okay. I have more to come. No? Okay.
Chime in for a sec.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Hi, Alice. Go ahead.
Something that we do at the ANC, we do a volunteer newsletter that we send out every Friday. And in that newsletter, we have, you know, any upcoming events, maybe some things that we've done, you know, some pictures or whatever, things that we've done the week before. But in that newsletter, we include a link to like a software program that we use. So the volunteers get that newsletter, they can click on the link to whatever the activity is that they want to sign up for, and that'll take them right to their account, and then they can sign up for that activity. So we find that really useful because then, you know, we know how many volunteers we have, we know then how many more that we need. And then of course, you know, if anybody working in a nonprofit knows there's what reporting, stats. So then we're able to extract from that how many volunteers, how many hours, and how many programs, etc. So we find that super useful. But then at the same time, you know, you get people that are not always really comfortable using, you know, some technology. So that has its problems too. People that, oh, I don't want to do that. I just want to be able to come show up. Yeah. So, you know, that's challenging, but certainly this is something that works for us.
Oh, Alice, thank you so much for sharing that. I can see, like, especially a larger organization like the Association for New Canadians, and having that kind of software available. But even the first half of your comment, I think, can be very useful for small organizations without that kind of software, where if you do put out a newsletter or something on Facebook talking about an upcoming event, instead of saying, if you'd like to, instead of advertising, we need help. So when you say we need help, that isn't actually asking anyone, it's creating awareness. But if you can have something to click, so as opposed to call us or expecting them to go through any effort to reach out, if it's a simple click where, you know, you can click and call right away, like click on the number, or you can click on an email, or you can click through to a Google form, or you can click. I hear that is effective in volunteer engagement. So so as you said, where it's right there in the newsletter, this is coming up. If you'd like to be involved, click. That's helpful.
And it's so easy. Like, we know how, you know, everybody's busy. So, you know, it's so easy to forget, like, oh my gosh, oh crap, we got this on the go tomorrow. Do we have any volunteers? Oh, we got to get on the phone. No, we log into our software, see, oh great, we already have 3 people. We're good to go.
Yeah.
So it kind of takes the panic now. Is there still panic sometimes? Of course there is.
Yeah.
You know, that's just the nature of volunteers, I think.
Right.
But certainly this is the program that we're definitely very grateful for.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Anybody else there want to make any comment or question or share something here? Okay, well, I'll carry on because I think the next few might generate some conversation and I want to make sure we have time for that. So, okay, this is what we hear. So again, like statistics, survey shows that these are actually the top 4 reasons why people say they don't volunteer. So they'll say, I don't have enough time. It's too long of a commitment. So again, back to that whole, you know, people who don't volunteer, and even those of us who do, see volunteer work as a bit of a lifelong commitment. Or when you sign up for an organization, you're committing yourself for a long time. People say money instead of time. So one of the things we suggest is find ways to take people's money. So if people say, I don't have time, I can't commit, they're willing to give money. All of us, I think, can use money to help us do what we do. So ensure that you have a way to do that. And people will sometimes identify the cost of volunteering as well. So things like if you have children, you might need to hire a babysitter to volunteer. It could be the group that you're involved with is expected to show up and bring their own garbage bags and gloves to do a community cleanup. Maybe you're expected to do potlucks or a sale of some kind, or gift tree, what are they called? The gift card trees, where you have to donate a gift card to raise money. So all of that, those expectations of financial contribution, the gas required to go to a volunteer event and to have to buy lunch at the event. And then people will legitimately say, no one asked me to volunteer. And organizations argue with me and they say, but Bettina, that's bananas. We've advertised, we've put it on Facebook, we've put up posters, we've had it in newsletters, on the community cable channel. We've told everyone we need volunteers. So I will say, creating awareness that you need volunteers and actually asking someone are two very different things. People want to be asked personally. They want to be made to feel good about why you're asking them. It's not because, as I was asked one time, I was the last person they could think of. That didn't make me feel good. You have 14,000 people, that I was the last person that they could think of. I would have felt much better if they had identified some positive things that I could bring to the position. In fairness, I think they felt bad that they were reaching out to me because they knew I was a busy person in my community. So it's all in the approach. I noticed that Tracy popped in, sorry, Tracy, and said, some people say that they just don't feel appreciated. You're absolutely right. People identify that. Thank you. Feel free to pop into the chat there, anybody, and just let me know what other reasons do people tell you why they don't volunteer. So it's important to know this, because if we want people to volunteer, we have to find a way to address the reasons why they don't. Tracy, go for it.
Yeah, we had some people that wanted to volunteer, but they're a little nervous about risk. So when we have volunteers, we're looking for volunteers to help be hike leaders or sweeps on a hike. And so, they're not sure what insurance covers them and what, if anything was to happen to the people they're taking on the hike. I think they were nervous of not understanding how they're covered through insurance. And honestly, I don't know how they're covered through insurance when it comes to a municipality. But certainly that's one thing that was holding people back from wanting to volunteer, was the level of risk that they were taking on personally in case there was an injury or something happened.
Yeah, Tracy, thank you for that. I will say, and I apologize for saying this, but we do offer sessions around risk management, and they're like 3-hour discussions, right? So I'll just kind of say, if people are identifying and you feel that it's preventing volunteers from engaging and having more meaningful roles with the organization, and if it's also preventing, that's like a tourism economic driver, right? For people to come in and have these guided tours, to speak with the municipality and say, this is an issue and we have to figure it out. So it's a good question I think people are asking. So from an organization's perspective, you'll want to be able to demonstrate to them, here's how we're mitigating that risk. So we're training our volunteer guides in this way. Here are the tools that we're making available to you. Cell phones or radios so you can call for help. The first aid take with you. The wraps that you would need if someone sprains their ankles. The first aid that's going to be offered to our guides so that you feel more confident, better equipped to deal with it on site. And in addition to that, here's the insurance coverage so that you personally can't be targeted, you know, in a lawsuit, that the coverage is provided by X, and here's how this is dealt with. So you're just going through this like mitigation with them. And a lot of it is, you know, here's what we're doing to equip and prepare you to avoid risk. And I think like for a lot of volunteers, myself included, that would make me feel a lot more comfortable, because if it's a concern I have, here's how the organization is equipping me and the organization. And it could also mean, you know, here are things that we're doing for the participants who are accessing the hikes and the guides. They have to, you know, listen to a safety briefing. They have to, you know, certify that they're in good enough health to do this, that they're not going to go off trail, that they're going to do this, they're going to do that, and that they have to sign a waiver. Now, I know waivers, like, they're really not worth the paper that they're written on, but anything that can show due diligence, right? So that's a really good point that you raise. I think the point of this is for us as volunteer managers, we'll call ourselves, to think about the reasons why people say they're not volunteering or not volunteering more, and then finding a way to meet that need, right? Or to address that concern. So that one was specific to what you raised. There are organizations who are now exploring family volunteerism opportunities. So if someone says, I can't volunteer, I have a baby and a 4-year-old, okay, well, what are the options for you to bring your infant and your 4-year-old to an opportunity and still contribute, where it's a good experience for everybody, right? And what's the best time of day to do that? And for people who say, I don't have time, it's to say, well, what time do you have available? And to look for some specific tasks that they might be able to do. So I think it's a big shift in mindset around, I'll just show you now the traditional volunteer job description as we come up to it. But for us, it's about figuring out the motivation. So what would motivate someone to volunteer in the first place? And I always feel like I'm being condescending when I say things like this, but we hear instances where someone moves into a community and they're new, and they see a volunteer opportunity listed in the community, and they contact them and they sign up, and they're told, okay, well, what we need done is we need these newsletters stuffed in an envelope, or we're doing a kit for our AGM. We need you to stuff this kit. And the person has a poor experience and they don't stay on as volunteers. And when they're asked why, they say something like, well, I volunteered because I wanted to meet new people, but they gave me a job that I worked in isolation. So no one had asked them, what is motivating you to volunteer? Because if they did, they'd find out what they want to get out of it is to meet new people and to get to know the community. So then the group could have assigned a volunteer task or job that would help meet that person's motivation, right? So without understanding what might motivate someone, we're not able to meet their motivation and help them have a positive volunteer experience. So like someone even said, I don't know if it's like a famous quote or if someone just said it in a workshop one day, so forgive me, I'll lick 1 million envelopes if I know why I'm doing it. So also to make the connection as to the work that they're doing and why they're doing it. So there's lots of different levels of volunteer engagement. Often we go right to like the leadership role, that we're looking for people to be leaders, when in fact, it's almost better to start from like that outside and work your way into the leadership core. So there are people in the community or in your field of work who might just want to like be informed, right? They might want to receive your newsletters. They might want to engage with your social media accounts, just being informed of the work that you're doing. Then there are others who take it a step further, where they want to be supportive. So perhaps they're going to buy a ticket, or they might want to purchase a ticket to attend a fundraising event. Maybe if you ask them to share information on their social media networks, they will. So they're supportive of your cause. Then it gets into like active participation, where they're going to actually show up at your events. Maybe if you're doing an event, they're going to help clean up after the event. Maybe they're going to help do a trail network cleanup, or a cutback, or some active work with the organization. And only then might they look at taking on a leadership role. Sometimes we jump straight into the leadership. This is kind of a traditional volunteer job description, which is still of great value. So when people are looking for volunteers, being able to articulate or put to paper specifically what you're asking that volunteer to do. And if you're not able to articulate it, you're either not ready to bring in a new volunteer or you don't need a new volunteer. So you can think of it almost like a list of things to do. And this sounds very simplified, but we did a workshop on the Bonavista Peninsula here, and a group was really struggling with this. It was actually a tourism related organization. And I said, well, what I want you to do is think about it. If you had to go away for 3 months at the busiest time of year, and your sister-in-law said, I'll do what you do, but write me up a list. And I said, write up a list, a things to do list for that volunteer, for your sister-in-law. And anyway, perfect. So that's what they ended up doing. So it's just about putting it on paper and wrapping your head around what you want the person to do. So I had a colleague named Stephen, and Stephen researched this and could do a wonderful talk on it for you, but here's the summary. You would never ask someone, I hope you wouldn't, to marry you and be your life partner when you first meet them. But sometimes that's what we do with volunteers. They express an interest in being involved with our organizations, and we take them right to this leadership role, as opposed to kind of the dating method. So the dating method of volunteer recruitment is more about, first of all, having a coffee, getting to know each other, talking about the work that you do, why you do the work that you do, how volunteers contribute to that. Then you might want to ask them on a second date. And the second date would be inviting them along to one of your events where they can be a participant in it, observe, see how it all goes. Then your third date might be, would you like to be involved with an event? We need someone who's going to, welcome people at the gate or sell the admission tickets, or we need someone to help clean up after the event, or we need someone, whatever that specific short-term episodic job is that you need done. And slowly, as the person gets familiar with the organization and more comfortable, only then would you invite them into a leadership role. And the fun thing about this dating method for volunteer engagement is it's okay to date a lot of people at the same time, and you don't need to make any apologies for it. You should always be courting potential volunteers. So you can take someone for a date on Monday night as the first date, and Wednesday night you can be taking someone else on the third date. So always kind of be courting where you have people that you can be reaching out to. All right, so I'm just gonna move with a couple of best practices here. We've talked about asking personally. Assuming that no means not now or not this position, as opposed to a flat out, no, I will not volunteer ever, never with your group. If someone says no, it could just mean it's not the right time for them, or what you've proposed for them to do is not something that they're interested in doing, but they might be interested in doing something else. I'm going to open it up for questions here. This is just some tips on recruiting leaders, and I can send this out to you, Darlene, with some tip sheets that you can send to people that they can read at your leisure if this is something that you're interested in. Perfect. And sorry, what was that?
I said, perfect, I'll do that, yeah.
Yeah, great, thank you so much. And so then my last slide here really as an engagement tool, and we have some time here for questions or for comments, is just the importance of telling our stories. So as organizations who engage volunteers, being able to talk about, because of volunteers, our community, like what? Our community is better able to provide a tourism experience. Because of volunteers, our community is better able to focus on sustainable tourism initiatives. Volunteers impact our organization by, the contribution of volunteers means that. So anything that you can do to like quantify, share, put into words like that value of volunteer engagement. So Tracy, as you commented earlier, people feeling not valued. Sometimes, most often, it's not because they're not valued. It's just people find it hard to put into words the value that they bring. So I find like this is hard work to think of, like it can be brain hurting work, but it's worth taking the time to finish 1 or 2 or 3 of these sentences so that you can communicate that to others, right? And create this positive feeling about volunteer engagement with your group, because people want to be associated with stuff that they feel good about, the volunteer with things that make them feel good. So you're telling your stories. Is anyone currently telling a story? Have you used this method? Or are you like, oh my gosh, I never thought of this. We need to put work into this. We're supposed to be playing here in a sandbox. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts or questions, ideas, your best practices. You know, what was it maybe even about this sandbox session that you decided to jump on today, about an hour of your day? Is there something specific you wanted to talk about?
Tina, I find when you praise people and thank them for their time and everything, they feel much more appreciated, and you get much more excitement out of them. I find their expression and their excitement in doing it. When you go out of your way and just, oh, I'm so glad you volunteered, and oh, good to see you here today. And yeah, it always puts a smile on someone's face too.
Yeah. And Darlene, you know what? You just said a smile. We hear from people and they say literally when they show up to volunteer that that's all they need to make them feel good. They need someone to smile at them and to say thank you for coming today. Thank you. And I mean, given that oftentimes it's volunteers ourselves, so I'm involved with a group and it's like parents who are working on something in the community. So there's not one of us who's in charge. There's no staff person to say to, so we say to each other. So we're like, thank you so much for all that effort you put in at our meeting last night. And then that mom will turn and say, and thank you for sending out the follow-up emails. And thank you for showing up at the event. And so we giggle at it a little bit, but we're recognizing and thanking each other. So that's nice. Yeah. Tracy, do you have something there?
Tracy, I think Tracy had to leave to jump on her next.
Okay, she waved. That's right. She had to go. I think probably saying she wanted to say. Tracy says thanks. Okay. Is there anybody else who wanted to come in here? Alice, Joe, Rebecca?
I touched on our newsletter already, and I can't take any credit for its implementation. However, when I came onto the team last year, something that we started doing once a month in our newsletter, we do a volunteer spotlight. So we'll highlight one of our volunteers with their picture and a little bio and why they decided to volunteer with us. So it could be a volunteer that maybe they've been volunteering with the ANC for 5 years, or maybe it's somebody that's new and they've just started volunteering and their motivation behind it. And I think that that's been such a special thing to see, because when you reach out to that volunteer like, hey, would you like to be featured in our newsletter? They're, really?
Yeah.
Really? So they definitely feel that sense of appreciation for sure. And recently we undertook the kind of gargantuan task of reaching out to all the volunteers on our listserv, which was just over 700 volunteers via email and phone, just to kind of touch base with people. A lot of people, it's a lot of volunteers, but we knew they all weren't active. So it was, like an individual email, the same email, but it was, individually sent, addressed to that volunteer personally. And we just kind of said like, are you still volunteering with us? Is there any reason why you're not volunteering with us anymore? Just those kinds of questions. And most of the feedback we got were things about you talked earlier. People's jobs, the commitment, they don't have the time. We had a lot of people that have moved away. But for the most part, anybody that wasn't still volunteering still want to be part of the newsletter, because like you said, they still like to be informed. and they still like to know what was going on, so that should their schedules free up and they do find that they have more time, they know what's going on and they always feel like they can, reach out to us still.
Yeah, I love that, Alice. So the fact too, sometimes I hear from organizations and they say that they've lost volunteers. So they just kind of accept that, this person would regularly show up and now they don't show up anymore, or they used to come to meetings and they just stopped coming. And there's almost this acceptance, well, I guess they just quit. And they don't do any kind of like an exit interview or follow up with them, partly because they don't want to pressure the person or make them feel bad, right? That they quit or that they left, as opposed to kind of following up with them to thank them for their service, right? And the time that they did give. And they can say, we noticed that we haven't seen much of you lately. We just wanted to follow up, if there's anything that we can do to make your volunteer experience better, or if you'd like to talk to someone, or if you're looking for different opportunities. Like there's lots of ways that you can Google like volunteer exit interviews or follow-up forms, just with a couple of questions, because someone might have quit or stopped volunteering. I shouldn't say quit. Someone may have stopped volunteering for a logistical reason, without realizing, had they gone to the organization to talk about it, it could have been overcome.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Because so one of the emails I got, this volunteer emailed me back and they said, well, I didn't find there was anything that I wanted to do. And the only volunteer opportunity seemed to be with kids. And I don't want to work with kids. I don't want to volunteer with kids. I was like, whoo. So I took a bit of time with that one to figure out, like, how am I going to respond to this person? So I took time and I reached out to one of my colleagues who used to be on the community connections team to see if he had any kind of background with this particular volunteer. And basically he was like, good luck. So I did email her back and just kind of said, I'm sorry that, you haven't been able to find things that have been able to, suit your schedule and your needs. This is kind of what we had. And she didn't want to sign up for anything either. She wanted to be able to volunteer on like this day at this time. And that was it. And I was kind of like, well, this team, we all have commitments. We all have families. We can't necessarily say that some of our events are going to be on this day or this night every single month. Like it just doesn't work that way. I didn't say that. But you
understand,
right? You get the gist. Anyway, she hasn't responded yet. So
okay, but I could have had something where they said and found out, I don't want to be engaged with young people. I don't like kids, or I don't like this. And fair enough. So are there opportunities to volunteer where children are not involved, right? So fair enough. Yeah. So I see Darlene here, and I know, Darlene, you're cognizant of the time, because Nora and her had said to me, these Sandbox sessions are an hour and we're really strict with that. So I apologize because I went over 5 minutes, but
no worries.
In fairness, I kind of made up a little bit of time. Darlene, I would just encourage everybody here. Look, I'm going to show my last slide.
Yeah.
So my contact information is here, Bettina Ford at cscnl.ca, and my telephone number. I'm paid to talk to people. For those of you who are here in Newfoundland and Labrador, or from outside of Newfoundland, you can contact me, email me. We have a wealth of resources on our website. I'll send some information, Darlene, to you to send out. And to those of you in St. John's, we have an office here in the city as well on Anderson Avenue. So do feel free to connect with us. I'd love to carry the conversation beyond today. And if we can be of any help, we'd love to be. And I just really thank you, Darlene, to GMIST for the opportunity to connect with these great people.
Thank you so much, Bettina. Is there anybody else have any last minute questions before we head off here? We're really concerned about everybody's time, but if you have a question before we head out, that would be, we could take time to, what's that, Rebecca? Thank you, Rebecca. So don't forget, and thank everyone for attending. Please don't forget to complete your survey at the end of the session. And check out our gmist.ca for any upcoming programs. We have a lot more Sandbox sessions and other sessions on to go. So thanks, everybody.